So thank you for joining, Dustin.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I think I'm seeing a few familiar faces as well on the Zoom chat. So I think a few of these wonderful people I've had the opportunity to work with. So welcome.
Fabulous. That's great. So we want to learn a little bit more about you guys and who has joined us today. So I'm going to send out a poll. Here we go. You guys see the poll there? And then if you can answer, how do you do takeoffs currently? If you guys could just get in and answer this, and we'll just have a conversation about it as you're answering. So if you're doing pen and paper, Excel, you're using BuildExact, you're using another software or other. We've got a couple people who are using BuildExact already. Excel, pen and paper. All right, well, this is kind of what we're seeing in the marketplace. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Justin, as you're seeing the results here. We've got the majority of people here on the call are using BuildExact. And then the second is Excel. What do you see as using Excel, and how do you see that impacting the takeoffs and estimates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without a doubt, when we're working with builders and taking them onboarding a BuildExact, the number one previous solution they've been using is Excel. And I get that as a lot of builders, as they start, that's a natural progression for them. They're oftentimes getting templates from friends or colleagues in the industry, and then using that Excel is really the backbone. And I certainly recognize it really does have some advantages in terms of obviously being able to, if you know Excel, if you're really comfortable with it, that ability to customize it. But at the same time, I think a lot of them come to BuildExact because of a lot of the inherent limitations of Excel. I just had a builder a couple of weeks ago. He had been using his Excel sheet for quite a while, but it broke. And it was this really complicated thing that somebody had like built for him, and it broke and he couldn't figure it out. And he'd been sort of hobbling along with it. And eventually he went like, this is crazy. There's got to be a better way, essentially, right? So even just from that, like using it day to day, there is that natural evolution of BuildExact. And that really oftentimes when people look at BuildExact, it's more than just the estimating, right? It's like I said, the takeoffs that we're doing it in. So even all the things like printing off the plans, getting down on the kitchen table, trying to draw it all out, putting into Excel on the laptop, like that is just one part of it. Whereas BuildExact, that is a key part for us for sure. But there's so much more, even in taking that. Once you have all the information in Excel, then you have to get it into a quote letter, right? Try to get it into something that's presentable. So again, lots of times, and again, another story, I was chatting with a builder around, he was taking his Excel, copying and pasting it into a Word document, and then had to go through and edit the Word document to take out certain fields and stuff like that. So when I was showing him through in terms of, hey, by the way, to build a quote letter, you just click a button and it allows you to toggle the information up and down. Like that was a really big moment. Like that alone probably took him 15 to 20 minutes, where I was able to do it in like half a second kind of thing. So again, great place to start. But as time goes on, it just definitely is a real natural progression for the majority of our builders.
I love that. Yeah, there's a lot of unique stories out there, right? And obviously, there's a lot of efficiencies that can be had. So, thank you guys for answering that first one. We've got the second one. Everybody's already answered. When do you do takeoffs and estimates? If you can see the results there, Dustin. Some
Actually, I
people
can't see
do.
the results.
Okay, only I can, I guess. So, basically, we're seeing that. 22 or 50% of people are doing them during the day's working hours. And then 45% are saying anytime they can fit them in. And then the remainder are during the wee hours of the night. And that was just, and someone just added to during the wee hours of the night. So they're unfortunately having to stay up to get that done. So what do you see in terms of that, and what is the most efficient and effective practice for doing takeoffs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really love this question because oftentimes when we chat with builders about this, they do talk about they're doing wee hours of the night anytime they can fit them in. And as you really start to have that conversation with them, you start to realize that a lot of that is because their processes are really, really inefficient, right? They're having to spend so much time on takeoffs and estimating. They're having to spend so much time on actually running the project, managing their team, going back and forth with their trades, with their dealers. And so oftentimes it becomes that little window that you can kind of sit alone, uninterrupted, to work on that. And so as we start to really go through these conversations with builders and get them on board, it's about, we come back to Build Exact, it's about 80% faster takeoffs. It's about getting a quote 5 times faster. And so a lot of that just comes back down to giving you more time in your day. So you don't have to just squish it into those wee hours. You have time because you've improved and you found efficiencies in your business that you can do it during the day because you're managing, you're on top of things, you're streamlining a lot of your processes. So it becomes something you can fit into the working hours. And oftentimes, when we chat with builders, we're really wanting to understand, like, why did you come to Build Exact? Like, what was the catalyst behind wanting to come in and find a estimating and takeoff platform? And universally, there's always this conversation about, well, I need to get faster, I need to get more efficient at it because I'd rather spend the wee hours of my night enjoying my life, spending time with my family. I had a builder a couple of weeks ago. He talked about how he was doing a lot of remodels, pumping up quite a few quotes, and so he was having to get up at like 4 a.m. every day because for him that was the only time in the day that he felt uninterrupted, that he could get that stuff out. So he was spending a couple hours every day, every morning, working on quotes. And it's like, man, like, let's get you a better way to do that. And we were working on, specifically with him, we were really talking about optimizing templates. So instead of having to go through and fill all this stuff in all the time, it's like, hey, you've really nailed this down. And he came from Excel, so we imported his Excel sheets in and did a little bit of tweaking, and really about optimizing that process so he could just sort of knock them out. He had 10-15 minutes during the day. He could quickly create an estimate from a template, fill in some key things, tweak the quote letter, and knock that off, and do that from the truck on the side of the road while he's waiting for his lunch or while he's got a little bit of downtime during the day, kind of thing. So I really think, again, a lot of it comes back down to just getting better systems and processes, streamlining that, so you don't have to do it in the wee hours of the night. You don't have to do it whenever you can fit it in, sort of thing. So super important, super
That's
important.
right. And there might be a little bit of procrastination because people really don't like doing it. So the next question is, how much time do you currently spend doing estimates and takeoffs? And looks like 18% said as little as possible. I hate doing them. 41% said I try to fit it in whenever and however I can. And then another 41% said it's an endless task and there's never enough time. So
totally. Yeah. This is, I had a builder describe it to me early on in my Build Exact career. He kind of goes, Dustin, like, estimating is not hard. Once you've done a couple, once you have some experience, he goes, it's not really that hard to do, but he goes, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's the whole entire process. If you're doing it outside of Build Exact and you have your pen and paper, and if you got plans, you're printing off the plans. It's that whole entire process. Then the time to sit down, to go through line by line by line by line, adding in your markup, pulling out your allowance items, building all your specifications. It's not hard, but it just takes a lot of freaking time. So again, so much of what we talk about with Build Exact is that ability to upload and scale and start to do takeoffs in less than a minute is super, super important, right? So it just becomes one less thing you have to trudge around. You're on your computer, download your plans, upload them, and you're off and running. And again, so much of what we work with, and anybody that's done a training session with me, they know what I'm going to say now, but so much of it again comes back down to that template. How much can you optimize? How many times are you doing the same thing over and over and over again? Even things like, like we've taught it a lot, but Jennifer, is even around your dealer's price lists. Like, how much time do our builders and remodelers, how much time do they spend around just chasing prices on the phone, waiting for that price, or just taking the risk and just putting a price in, hoping that it's right or it hasn't changed too much? So again, it's so critical in terms of, again, having that systematic process, having really good templates, having those presets, and making sure that you're just working efficiently and optimizing. Because at the end of the day, like, so, as you can see the poll now, people saying 18%, I hate doing them. It's like, yeah, like I've really not really met many people who really like doing the estimate. It's a means to an end. It's a means to make sure that you have that next project, that you can keep going on that profitability, keep your team engaged with work, and feeling fulfilled in terms of building projects and
Yeah,
building the
yeah, and that's
infrastructure.
really good
So
insight. And Dave actually says it's his full-time job, so you can see him in the chat. And I'm just gonna
mm,
say again, I'm Jennifer with Build Exact. Thank you guys for joining us, and we've got Dustin here, who's a 4-year expert on takeoffs and estimates and best practices around that, who's been with Build Exact for 4 years. And we're tapping his brain today to find out everything we can about best practices and takeoffs and estimates. So please, if you have a question, enter it in the chat and we can address it. But we're going to go through a few more things. And thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to stop sharing these results. That was super fun. Thank you guys for participating there. Now we're going to go into just a few more things about, Dustin, if you could just talk to us about what are the important elements? What is critical in an estimating process?
yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple key ingredients we want to look at. And obviously, we want to make sure that everyone's comfortable using Build Exact, that you're comfortable navigating the different types of takeoffs, really knowing strategically different ways to add in the markup and stuff like that. But fundamentally, some of the most important things we looked at is, like I started talking about earlier today, is templates. Templates are super critical in terms of being able to create a launching point where you're building a really highly effective estimate. And as we look at templates, sometimes people go, yeah, like I get that idea. It's probably not too dissimilar to, for those coming from Excel, they have a template they're pulling across. But the templates in Build Exact are a lot more powerful in that we always think of them really as sort of a giant checklist, right? And that ability to overbuild your templates. And Build Exact even recently launched some fantastic functionality where you can actually pull in categories and items from your other templates as well, too. So it allows you to really think and build your estimates in a really modular approach. So you're not having to build all of this stuff in terms of your templates and your categories every single time. You can be really pulling them in as you need them to go, oh, actually, this project has some fencing. Let me pull that in. This project has, I need to do some landscaping as a part of it. Let me pull that in. So starting with really robust templates is absolutely really, really critical. From there, making sure that you're going through and even looking at in adding recipes. Again, a story I had a couple of weeks ago as I was chatting with a builder, and he was really interested in learning about recipes. And I asked him, I was like, well, like, why are you so, like, what's got you so interested? Because he was like, first thing he wants to know was about recipes before he learned anything else. And it's like, okay, like, fantastic, but tell me about that. And he had talked about how he was getting burnt more and more in his projects because as he was quoting, he would just sort of look at a door and go, I think the door is going to be this amount. And I'm looking at my drywall and I think it's going to be this amount. And that was really what he was doing, just these general processes. But he was finding more and more that he was actually getting burnt on pricing because when it came to actually buying the items, he was finding that all of a sudden prices were going up, but he didn't know where they were going up and he didn't know how a certain item was then factoring into changing the price. And so he had then started to put like, go really, really extreme in a lot of his pricing. And then he was finding that he was getting underbid. So getting into really good recipes as well is fantastic in terms of really breaking that down. What's in that door? What's in that drywall? What goes into the concrete? What goes into the landscaping? And then as prices change.
Yeah, there are two things,
So,
Dustin, that, like that what you're talking about kind of. So there, you can benefit from the estimates on using technology because you can connect to your supplier, right? And you're
exactly.
getting those true costs, but then also a lot of the suppliers have those assemblies and recipes already put together. So then you're not missing anything. So if you could just make sure that, the audience understands both those aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a part of the assembly, what we are always advising to do is try to pull that pricing in from your supplier. And obviously, firstly, that allows you to make sure by pulling that linked item in that sits in the assembly at all times. So then when that assembly is then is then stuck into a template, or as you pull it into your estimate, because it's connected, it's actually always updating essentially. So you may build an assembly 6 months ago with a door and it would have been X price at that point. But as the dealer is updating it, that price is pulling through. So when you pull it into an estimate, you're not necessarily using 6 months ago prices, you're using today's prices. Same assembly, same amount of effort, but that ability to automatically update it is super, super important. And again, just taking away a lot of that guesswork, as well as taking away a lot of that risk of, are you potentially underquoting again, right? Like I was telling that story there. So yeah, and not to mention too, even just like I was mentioning, I think the biggest benefit is being able to break it down. So you're getting really, really accurate in that. And part of this too is when we talk about the assemblies, is people forget too that part of the benefit is that when you get into the job, right? So now we're talking, a couple weeks, months down the road, because you've done that assembly, because you've done the thinking and the math on that item, when it actually comes to ordering the items, it's a lot faster too. You don't have to then sit there and go, well, I quoted 5 doors, but now I need to figure out, well, how much do I actually need to order? It's there, a couple clicks of a button, and you can raise your purchase orders and send that out to your suppliers and dealers. So I know a little out of the scope of this conversation, but that's just another example of being able to keep using that work and that effort to keep benefiting you to find those efficiencies well into your project and as you get up and running. So coming back to the estimate, so we talked a bit about templates are super important, making sure they're really robust, making sure you're leaning on the assemblies, pulling in your dealer pricing. And then of course, beyond that, I'm really big advocate of making sure you're building your specifications in a really, really robust, beautiful way. And obviously making sure you get that quote letter really, really dialed in, getting your logo in, getting your branding done, making sure it's configured in a way that suits your business and really represents sort of your best self as you present that quote. So a couple really, really key things as a part of that process I'm always touching on.
I love that. So one thing, Dustin, that I'm seeing more and more is that remodelers and contractors are getting asked to bid on. And I think this is kind of like, it's easier for home buyers to just find somebody and shoot off an email or whatever. And they're asking for more from the contractor. So what I know a discussion in the space a lot is like how or if you're charging for it. And
Yeah.
what are you seeing in that space? And like, what do you, how are people reacting to that? Because there's a lot of like we just polled everybody, there's a lot of time invested in that. So how are you guys, and I'd love to see you guys respond in the chat as well. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, no, I'd love to see as well too how many people are charging for it. If you want to check that in the chat, yeah, that would be great to see. I can talk a little bit about this though, because this is an area that we're seeing a real trend move towards. And I think what a lot of the home buyers are realizing is quality in their builder is super, super important, right? And I think part of that is then the builder being able to go up front and say, hey, I'm not just going to give you just a super basic quote, but I'm going to give you a really detailed breakdown. And it becomes a little bit more of a consultative nature instead of just having to get a quote out the door. And part of that is building a lot of trust, helping to the homeowner really understand what is the process that you're going to go through. I know I haven't seen any super, super recent data, but I know obviously as the industry is going through a little bit of strife at the moment with obviously interest rates up and a little bit of change in work, some of the stats coming out. So I think a lot of the homeowners as well are a little bit nervous that they're about to hand over a lot of money. Is that contractor going to be there for the duration of the project, or is there something going to happen? So I think a lot of the times being able to talk about how charging up front, charging for that proposal really starts to show that this is going to be a really consultative service, that you do really good quality, you're going to quote it correctly, and you're going to take them on a journey. And another part of this as well too, and this is kind of zooming out a little bit, and I think a lot of the times when we're working with our contractors, our builders, is they forget is think about the end process when you're giving the client a quote letter, right? It's a really expensive piece of paper, but talking about the client experience, the homeowner's experience is super, super critical, because at the end of the day, I know no builder wants to just compete on price. It's kind of a lose-lose race to the bottom in a lot of projects. So having a really robust client experience, and that could be using things like the client portal, that's about presenting a great looking quote letter. That's about potentially building a schedule and presenting that across to the homeowner. That's really important to give the client a real sense of what you're all about, what you are about to do, a bit of an insight into the quality and the depth of the work. So it's absolutely super critical that as we're chatting with it, if they are charging, and I can see a few people are talking about that, then thinking about how do you go to that next level. And a good example of how it's actually not that hard is when we're working with when we are seeing that they are charging for it, there's an inevitable conversation where we want to talk about scheduling. So are you producing a schedule and presenting that to the client to give them a timeline of that piece of paper, how long it's going to take to turn it into that project? And a lot of times it's really easy to do. You have a template built, you've built it all out already, you've saved that. And then so when you're doing your quote, you create a job, apply the template, that schedule template. You might tweak a few things here or there, collapse it, print the Gantt chart, and then you have a quote, you have a schedule rather to present with the client too. So really, really simple thing, but it starts to create that more holistic client experience, starting to show quality. And that's, again, I think that leads to that conversation of that consultative and therefore the money that you can, that deposit you may charge up front to do that work.
I love this.
So a
So
couple
thank
people.
you, Greg and Dave, and I think Fernando for contributing your thoughts on this, because this is a really important discussion. It's actually a very, very active discussion that I've seen a lot of. I think it's almost polarizing. Some people believe that there's no way you should be charging, and other people, and even people who 2 years ago felt like they shouldn't be charging, now are charging, because it's so, the industry dynamics are so different. A lot of them have massive backlogs of work, still even, and then are just putting a price around this extra work that they're doing. And I think there is certainly some value to it. What would you say? And I love, these are 3 different answers, so I love that we're getting 3 different perspectives. So thanks again, Greg and Dave and Fernando. So I am also wondering, like, where and how you would recommend, Dustin, that the contractor is sharing or getting buy-in from the subs in order to make sure that that schedule does work.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of this, this has been a really interesting area, and this has been an area that I've seen evolve probably beyond just the pricing implications and a little bit around interest rates and stuff. This has been a really critical area because we know it varies a bit, but there's a bit of a trade shortage happening. So working really closely and building those relationships with the trades is absolutely integral in terms of building that trust and helping them understand that, together you guys are actually successful across the journey as well. But a really cool way that I've seen this done actually is it was an electrician who was involved in the process. But what he did and what the value he brought is became more of a team effort, where when he was talking about it, because we know that there's a lot of energy efficiency standards that have to be adhered to now. Obviously, utility prices have gone up so much. So this electrician was partnering with the builder and really coming in as a subject matter expert, not only in are we going to put the wires in and the lights in, but really working with them around how they can really do it in a really energy efficient way, choosing really cost effective items as well. And so there was a really interesting process in that consultative nature that he would engage them in. And he was so often when the contractor was spending a quote, he was really presenting it alongside, hey, here are my trades that I'm going to use, right, as an extension of that quality and that consultative service too. So that's fantastic, and I've been really keen to see if that partnership becomes something we see more of. So instead of it just, I've got my electrician to put the lights in, if there's a lot more of that collaboration that happens, and even at a client-facing level too. So definitely an area I'm keen to see as time goes on.
Yeah, so when we're talking about, and I was just asking you about the subs, and what I'm also wondering is, like, when you're thinking about the whole process, who are the stakeholders and how are you making sure that they're in that process where and how they should be? And how do you advise our audience on making sure that they are including the stakeholders in the process?
Yeah, totally. So, there's a couple fundamental things within Buildings Act. It's about sending the request for quote early, as soon as possible, with lots of information. So giving because I know from the trades perspective, there can be a lot of frustration for them in terms of, do they have enough information? Do they have everything they need? Because they're very busy. There's nothing worse for them than having to go back and forth to make sure that, do they have everything? Do they have all the required information to build that quote or tender that for that response as efficiently as possible. So fundamentally, it's always about building a really good request for quote. There's some tips and tricks we take a lot of contractors and builders through in Buildings Act around presets, around making sure you have all the documentation loaded right at the beginning, chucking in the documents section, and then just reattaching it. So it becomes a really simple process to make sure you have everything. And then from there, it's a lot of it is really taking them on that journey. And I don't think it's a one and done. It's certainly an evolution to get them across that process to even terms of, building scheduling. I was chatting with a builder not too long ago, and he recently just canned one of his trades because they just weren't showing up on time. And so it was, for him, it was a bit unfortunate because the guy I'd been previously working with had, I think, retired. So, but building those relationships, building that trust, building that communication flow, and again, really helping to understand, like, what do they need out of you in that too? It's got to be a two-way street. So what do they need out of you? Making sure you can deliver that. And then hopefully at that stage, you can then get reciprocating in terms of getting really high quality work and getting, again, that scheduling, getting them showing up on time, delivering it, and providing that consultative service back as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a comment on that, and then we have a question in the chat. But there's a group that I know that advises remodelers, and they talk about kind of the stages of a project, right? And how it's just like an emotional journey for your home buyer or your homeowner, and you're in and out of the house, you're in their personal space, there's all these other things going on. And one thing that I think is, they had some tips for if there is an issue, and how you address that, but then how you are closing out the project and making a meeting with them, bringing them a bottle of champagne, like before you're finishing the project, and doing all these other things.
Yeah.
But one thing that I thought was a little bit interesting is that they were advising remodelers to do a personality test with the owners to make sure it's a match.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine, I mean, if you're doing a really big remodeling project, which I have lived through before, you have to have a good relationship. It's very interesting. So, so the question from Jeffrey, Dustin, you get the chance to read that. He just joined. Zach, thank you for joining, Jeffrey. That's awesome. And he's asking about the pricing accuracies and specifically about labor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, probably what Jeffrey's referring to there, just for those of you who are joining curious, was for our US-based users, we have a partnership with a company called OneBuild. And what OneBuild does is, and this is all they do, is they are basically a price aggregator. So they go through and they look at what is the pricing for all of these different items. I'm trying to remember the library now. It's a massive library. Wish I knew off the top of my head, but it's a huge library. And as a part of that, when you find the item, you can include labor or not include labor as a part of it. So their library is huge. This is all OneBuild does around this price aggregation. So this is just, they're constantly going through, constantly tweaking their processes and stuff. Now, from an accuracy perspective, generally the feedback we get is it is very accurate. There is a few fringe cases where if you're in a very rural area, then that can sometimes cause a little bit of a skewing. And sometimes in those situations, it's better to check and just verify against the pricing or do a little bit of an approximation. But for the vast majority of time, it has been very, very accurate across the board. I haven't had anybody complain about it. There's been a few people who said a little bit high sometimes, but in those cases, it's probably better to be a little bit high. And then after you do some projects, you'll make those little fine tweak calibrations as to where exactly it falls in. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of some assurance there.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dustin. So any other questions, you guys just throw them in the chat. Thank you. We want to make this as interactive as possible. But next steps on our conversation. So after the takeoff and estimate, what happens, Dustin?
Say that again. Sorry, I was just reading one of the other questions.
Yeah, no worries.
Dave's question.
Is there another question that we should address? Sorry, did I miss one?
Oh, I was just reading Dave's question just to see if there was. Oh yeah, gotcha. So Dave is just talking a bit about through the projects. So once the drawings approved, proceed with the drawings and the final selections, then provide a final budget to the client. Subcontractors who provide the layouts, elevations. Yeah, this is really interesting actually, Dave, because this is another thing we're seeing quite often where what a lot of the builders and contractors are doing are providing a preliminary quote. And I think this is a really good approach, because if there are some instances where you can't necessarily charge up front, or you do want to look at charging, but the client maybe is a bit hesitant, then actually providing an initial cost, and then once you get that approval, or once you can get a deposit, then doing the actual quote. And how I've seen this really, really well done, I love this, is actually through, again, the use of templates. So I've had a builder, a couple of them actually I've come across now. They'll build a template and they'll price a lot of it out for a standard square footage home. And then what they'll do is, when the client wants that initial estimate, then they'll create the estimate from the template. It'll be pre-priced. All of that will already be filled out based on a couple of parameters. Then they'll tweak a few things based on the conversation, just to kind of help hone it in a little bit more. Then they can print the quote. And typically when they print it, they don't show the breakdown. So it might just be a final price, or it might be some category pricing, but you're wanting to keep some of the cards close to your chest. Then from there, giving that quote letter to the client. And that whole process can take minutes to do it. Again, it depends how much you want to tweak it, but that whole process I described can, like, 5-10 minutes max to get that initial quote out the door. Then when the client does pay the deposit, or they do want to go ahead, or whatever that, continue with the next step is, then what they'll do is, typically the builder or contractor will go back into that estimate, then they'll upload the plans, then they'll go back through and they'll start to revise it and start to do the takeoffs and start to fine tune it a little bit more. And then when they print the estimate, then they're going to add in the specifications, then they're going to show the quote breakdown. So it's not a lot more work at that stage, but it is a really, really powerful way to get that initial price out the door, to give them some immediate value without a ton of work, but then being able to then go back and leverage it. So just another thing to think about. And yeah, super, super important.
That is important. And actually, the surveys that I've seen is that timing, the amount of time that it takes you to respond has a significant relevance to you winning or losing the job. So speed turnaround, and actually this is just from basic remodeling research from the Home Improvement Research Institute. So that this fast turnaround can make or break your conversion there. So what if you miss a step in the process, Dustin? What happens after the takeoff and estimate, and what if you miss a step?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of miss a step, there's a couple things that probably fall into, right? It's about, if you're not quoting, if you're missing some things in there, obviously your quote's going to be off. If you're missing parts in your specifications, that's presenting a subpar quote letter. And then even into the job management side as well. This is another area that I'm super passionate about. And I always use the analogy that a lot of the times when we chat with builders and contractors, they're really focused on getting the estimate out the door, right? And trying to do it as quickly as possible. And I always talk about, that's good. That's important. I won't argue that. But that's kind of the plane getting off the ground, right? We've all been in an airplane. We're all pretty excited to get into the air. The seatbelt sign comes off and we can kind of relax. But at some point, that plane's got to land, right? And so making sure that the landing part of it is really around the job management side. And this is what, again, I love about BuildXact, is because the job just falls out of the estimate. So the effort and time and energy you put into that process can yield significant dividends in terms of, as you start to raise your purchase orders, as you start to build your schedule, as you start to build your invoicing schedule, and all those sorts of things too. So as you start to miss a step, it starts to compound across the entire project. So that's why, again, I come back and I'll sound like a broken record, and anybody that's done training with me will know this, is getting those templates set up right can help you start to make sure you don't miss any steps as a part of that process. So super, super important. Oh, can't hear you, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
So that was me being on mute. So one thing that I wanted to talk about and make sure that we're hitting is technology. And what you were just saying, obviously, technology plays a big role in that. So technology can create the efficiencies and make sure that there's more accuracy. But every part of every job is now, everything that you guys are doing is now impacted by technology, which, goes from getting your referrals on social media, having a presence. I bet everybody feels like they have to be an influencer in their local marketplace. How else is technology playing a role in everybody's
Mhm.
work? And how would you recommend best leveraging it, Dustin?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear actually if anybody wants to drop in the chat. Like, what are the other tools you're using? Are there other softwares? Are there particular devices? Are you using a tablet more often? Are you on your phone more often? I'd love to see just in the chat there if anybody's comfortable. Just share what other tools you're using, what sort of, what technology is sort of using and finding the best of. But you're absolutely right. Like the whole entire process is influenced and really getting more and more digitized, right? So I'm going to get into the weeds on this answer because I think it's a really important part to understand the technology as it sits and all of its intersections, right? So right from the get-go, absolutely like you said, right? All that capturing of your marketing, making sure you've got that digital presence, making sure you've got a website, right? That is super critical. And I'm still really surprised today, even just how many builders and contractors I meet that don't have a website. Like many of them make it work for sure, and a lot of word of mouth, but I always recommend just as a business, and I like a lot of my background is working with small businesses, is you got to diversify, right? So having multiple leads coming in from multiple areas is super important, and a website underpins that. So there's that part of it. But as we start to go through the client journey, when you go, okay, now I've got a lead, that's the other parts of Build Exact we haven't talked about so far, right? So making sure you're capturing a lead. You're getting that info out of your head, out of your phone, and capturing it in a single spot. And I still to this day, I'm always asking builders like, how are they managing that pre-estimate process? What are they doing? And if I had $1 for every time I had somebody say, oh, I get a call, and I just like put them as a contact in my phone, like, this is Sammy from Dallas, and it's a new home, or a spec build or something. And I get it. Like if you don't have kind of a way to track that process, like that you're just doing the best with what you can, but it's something that is just it's such an important step, because if somebody falls through the cracks or you don't follow up with somebody in the appropriate amount of time, that's not a great client experience. And you're right from step one, you're not really kind of doing everything you can to get that project. So as we look at the technology again back into Build Exact, we're looking at the lead. We're looking at, I know for a lot of builders, they're communicating via WhatsApp groups, they're communicating via email, there's Facebook, there's Messenger. And again, I get it. You're trying to reach out to the client. But to be honest with you, I'm always really trying to encourage and ask, like, is that the most professional means? Like, could there be a better way? And I know, again, another guy's telling me a story of he's using WhatsApp and he's got his clients and his family, and it's just this messy kind of world of WhatsApp, and trying to figure out who's he got to follow up with, and making sure after a few beers he's not actually clicking on the wrong person and stuff like that. So, a lot of it is trying to go, hey, you know what? Getting into the client portal, talking about that digitized experience. Because again, a really minor thing, an example of this is when we get the quote letter out the door, I think it's like well over 60% of people are looking at that quote on their phone. Right. So if you think about that experience, if I don't know if anybody's ever tried to open a document, I'm sure everyone has at some point from their email. It's horrible. It's a horrible experience to be trying to look at this document, trying to read through what is in this thing, and you're scrolling around, and you got to think you've just put all this work into this really important document, but now they're on this kind of subpar experience. So when you share the quote letter from Build Exact to the client portal, it actually creates a web-friendly version as well. So it's not sort of bound by the A4 or whatever size. It actually optimizes towards the medium that they're on, right? It's a really minor thing, but it's all trying to just immerse ourselves that you guys and the client, the homeowner, is in that digital realm, right? And then we go through to the request for quote, like we talked about, like getting the dealer pricing fed in. That's all just this technology streamlining this back and forth, instead of having to go on email and attach documents and send that off and then call them up and then try to remember what the price was or whatever they said. It's about trying to streamline it and make it more efficient, right? And then all the way through to the job management side. So are you sending purchase orders? Are you sending the schedule out to the team on site? Do you have the paper trail of the change order? So all of that is super critical and can be done all digitally back and forth. So you have that paper trail instead of just going, I rang up my tradesperson and they said they could do it for X amount, but then there's nothing there. Like, I
Right.
hate that that's a thing, but if you don't have it written down, it doesn't really give you much of a leg to stand on, kind of thing. So that whole entire part of it, and then it's underpinned, and this is an area that we're super passionate at Build Exact and looking a lot more at. It's around the broader ecosystem of what other tools are our users using, right? So we've just enhanced a lot of our QuickBooks and Xero two-way integration, because we know that those accounting platforms are an absolute must, probably the first thing anybody creates in their business. They go on, they get that QuickBooks subscription lined up. So that better integration of information, not that we want to be an accounting system, but that ability to leverage the flow of information to further streamline it and make sure that we have better information so you can make better decision making from the data that's flowing across both those systems. So that's just another example of that ecosystem coming together. We integrate with Deputy, which is a time roster app. So making sure that, you might be scheduling your workers on site to go around to different areas, making sure those timesheets are automatically pushed into BuildExact, and just automating that whole cost tracking side of it, that labor cost tracking side. So one less thing for only a couple bucks a month. And then even things like email integration. And there's going to be lots more in the near future, but it all just really talks about this whole journey of the client underpinned by all those business practices underneath and the softwares that come from that.
Sure, offering utility at every stage of the project phase. So it looks like we have quite a lot of input where people are using different tools. So Marco PC, and then also laptop. Dave is using PlanSwift for Takeoff and Microsoft Project for scheduling, and something very poor for job cost. Caroline is using PlanSwift and PC. And then Greg, Telegram, I haven't heard of that. So Pipeline, I have Excel for scheduling. And then Fernando has a question. So is there any integration between Revit assemblies and BuildExact and moving Smartsheets? Smartsheets are complex.
Yeah. So there isn't an integration between Revit assemblies and BuildExact, but what we can do, and we can work with you around this, is actually formatting those assemblies in a way that we can upload them into BuildExact. This is really common, where we see a lot of our builders and contractors coming from other tools. We know that the transition of that data is really, really important. So just an example, you can import your assemblies, you can import price catalogs and item catalogs, you can import your estimates, your past estimates, as well as your templates in. And so once you kind of do one, you get the gist of it. It's not really hard, but it's absolutely something we know is really important in terms of leveraging and being able to keep using that data into BuildExact as well too. So super important. The one thing though, Jennifer, that really strikes me as I'm looking through a lot of these, specifically where people are talking about the software too, it's the different platforms, right?
Yeah.
And I totally get this. Like this makes absolute sense in terms of you're finding the problem and you're finding a solution for that problem. But something I think is really, really important is that transition between the softwares, right? So, what I mean by that, I mean, the beauty of BuildExact being end to end is that all the information just flows downhill. You put a lead in, and that lead follows all the way through to the outgoing invoice. And even same too. Like I'm not here to speak ill about other softwares. There's some really other great software tools out there. But if you use something like a different takeoff tool, you then have to kind of get that information out and then do something with it, right? So there's always this manual intervention process to keep stringing that data along. And again, I've had situations where then I've heard stories of where then all of a sudden the plans change. There's a revision. So then they have to go back into their software, redo some of those takeoffs, and then either try to manually copy and paste them across, or you have to kind of go, okay, well, I've already done some work here. I need to kind of maybe just trash that and then export those takeoffs again, and then to build them into a quote letter. So it's in each of those steps that it becomes super, super inefficient, and also opens up the risk, right? That human element. And this is a really key part. Like, part of when we're chatting with and we're sort of onboarding our builders, it's really talking about each time you have something like that, you can make a mistake, right? And so I've heard lots of stories where this is a little while ago, but a builder's talking about he was using Excel and a Word document. And so he was basically doing the revisions, updating the Word document, sending it off. And this client was going through a couple of revisions. I think he was getting probably pretty frustrated, but there was a missing part of it. He didn't bring one of the revisions across. Client signed on the contract. And then midway through the project, they were like, what happened to this thing that we got you to quote on essentially? And through the paper trail, the client was able to say, no, like you said you were going to do this, and you said it was 10 grand, I can't remember, not 30 grand or whatever. And so like the builder copped it, right? And so that was a 10, $20,000, whatever it was, mistake, because it was just a simple thing. And I guarantee you, and very much to the responses earlier, he's probably doing it at the wee hours. He's probably just
Yeah.
finished a 12-hour day. He was tired, he was exhausted. It's a completely natural human mistake to make. And that's why I think, again, having that all end to end is super critical. And in Build Exact, those revisions, just going back to the estimate costings, making your tweaks, doing a couple takeoffs, all of that automatically pulls to the quote letter, hit print, you have a new thing. You don't have to think about transferring that information. Did I get everything across? It's all there, sort of thing. So just really encourage people to think about the time that's being lost across each of those steps. Fantastic tools, all of them in their own right, but just something to think about as a part of that process.
Yeah, and I think too, like Dave has added here that they present the proposal in person, and that can just
Mm,
bring a really good foundational element to how you would kick off the project, right? Just being that in person,
yeah.
building that trust, having that face-to-face element, I think is huge. So I invite you guys to ask a last question. We're wrapping up here and we only have a few minutes left, but I'm wondering, Dustin, when we think about, one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about just the accuracy and how technology can play a role is if people are linked in with their suppliers and they're getting the actual pricing. So I know that I was talking to a remodeler last year, actually a new construction builder, and who lost money on a project just
Yeah.
because of the ebb and flow of material pricing in that point in time, which was horrible. So whether or not he like right now we're dealing with the wildfires that are in Canada and Australia and
Mm,
Texas and that are really threatening the price of lumber. And we have to make sure that you have the current pricing. But if you're linked with your dealer or your merchant, then and you're on top of that and you don't have to be concerned about how the price is changing. So
yeah.
if I don't know what you're seeing with that and how you're seeing, the fluctuation and how people are managing that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And again, this has been an area that I've seen a lot of really dramatic change. And I know everybody on the call here today has experienced this in some way, between supply chain issues through to geopolitical risk. I was chatting with a dealer not too long ago, and obviously some geopolitical issues that had come up had basically meant that part of their supply chain had basically been cut off, right? And it was very much like upstream. Some of the raw materials were flowing to China. That meant that all of a sudden some of those items either were going to be either not offered anymore, or the price is going to go up substantially, kind of thing. So this is a super, super important area, I think, in terms of having that accurate pricing, right? Making sure that you're not, where maybe 5, 10 years ago, you could go, look, my last job, that thing was X amount. I might put a couple extra cents on there, but probably good enough. That doesn't work in today's day and age anymore, really. It really doesn't. If you do that, it's a matter of time before something all of a sudden goes up a ton, and that's just pure money off your bottom line. Like that's it. Like that is just eating away at your margin, plain and simple. So having that accurate pricing in is obviously just trying to make sure you're hedging your bet in terms of, if I'm putting 20% markup, if I want to make 20% from this job, making sure that that live pricing is feeding through to preserve that 20%. And I'll Build Exact, and I'm super excited. We've a fairly new feature that's about to be launched is around advanced cost tracking and giving better, deeper financial analytics to say, you intended to make X, how are you tracking, and getting
Yeah.
real-time updates as your costs go into Build Exact, right? Because it's all about, you can build a quote and you can try to say, I want to make X money, but it's about making sure you land on that. And that live pricing is super critical. But like you mentioned earlier, though, too, I think the benefit of not only having accurate pricing and getting that quote done, with today's prices is important, but also that speed, right? Getting that
Yes.
quote out the door, because you're not going onto a website and trying to search through, you're not, calling them up, waiting for them to get back to you because they're fielding 50 other calls. That ability to just go through and just pull in that pricing and get that quote out the door is the double whammy of speed, but like I said, accuracy as well too. So super critical. And unfortunately, I don't think, and I know broadly speaking, depending on where people are, you may see some stabilization of some items in some categories. But I think that this sort of price instability across supply chains and across different resources, it's going to continue for the near future. So unless you're sort
Yeah.
of getting that live pricing, it's a matter of time before something you
Yeah,
misquote
you should be
something and it's going to
prepared
come
for
back
it.
and
And
bite
like
you.
Greg just put in the chat that he puts a line item in the contract for price changes during construction. And I can really appreciate that. I've actually saw a chat on the National Association of Home Builders Connect page, that just an industry group that were talking about how they are managing those changes
Mm,
and how they're building it into their contract. So that's one way to approach it. And then Dave says that they're holding their quotes for 30 days. Holding the quote for 30 days is great, but then, it's about when you purchase the items. So that, you can get into a sticky
yeah,
situation too with that. So thank you, Dustin, for your expertise. Oh my gosh,
pleasure.
what a great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. You'll get this as a recording via email when we depart, and we actually invite you to write us at any point in time. So it's dustin.e@buildexact.com. And I'm going to put that in the chat right here if you have further questions. But if you want to reach out to Dustin or anyone on the team, please just ping us and we're happy to help. Thanks again,
Yeah,
Dustin.
absolutely.
Thank you, everybody else, for
My
attending.
pleasure.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.